In the heart of ancient Rome, beneath the towering arches and bustling streets, a story of unwavering faith and extraordinary courage unfolds. This is the tale of Saints Proceso and Martiniano, two souls bound not by blood, but by a steadfast spirit that refused to bow before the empire's might. At a time when the Christian faith was hunted and crushed, when shadows of fear and persecution darkened the city, these men stood as beacons of hope. Their lives, marked by trials that would break the strongest of wills, instead became legends of perseverance and divine grace. Today, we journey into their world, a world where chains could not bind the spirit, where imprisonment became the forge of courage, and where martyrdom was not the end, but the beginning of eternal glory. Join me as we step back into the shadows of Rome to meet Proceso and Martiniano, the fearless martyrs whose faith echoed beyond the walls of their prison, inspiring generations to stand firm in the face of adversity. Chapter 1. From Captives to Champions of Faith. In the sprawling empire of Rome, where power and politics often overshadowed compassion and faith, the lives of two men, Proceso and Martiniano, were about to be forever changed. These were not born heroes or warriors of legend. They were ordinary men caught in extraordinary times, swept into the fierce storm of Christian persecution that threatened to engulf the entire city. Proceso was a humble servant, living a quiet life in the shadows of Rome's grandeur. Bound by duty, he moved through the city's labyrinthine streets with little hope for a future beyond servitude. He knew the weight of chains, not just of iron, but of societal expectations and fear. Martiniano, by contrast, was a seasoned soldier, a man of discipline and strength, forged in the brutal realities of the Roman legions. Loyal to the empire, his world was defined by order and conquest, his sword a symbol of power. But fate has a way of humbling even the mightiest. During one of the empire's relentless campaigns to root out Christians, both men were seized, not for crimes of violence or rebellion, but for their faith, or rather, the promise of faith that was about to take root within them. Thrown into the cold, damp cells of a Roman prison, Proceso and Martiniano faced a crucible of suffering and uncertainty. The walls were thick, and the air was heavy with despair. Yet inside this darkness, a spark of hope began to kindle. It was in this unlikely place that their true journey began, not as prisoners, but as seekers of a higher truth. Proceso, once resigned to a life of quiet servitude, found his heart stirring with a new courage. Through whispered prayers and secret acts of kindness, his soul awakened to a calling that transcended fear. Martiniano, the hardened soldier, confronted an inner battle more fierce than any he had faced on the battlefield. His loyalty was challenged by a newfound faith, one that demanded not swords or shields, but surrender and trust in an invisible king. Their transformation was gradual, marked by moments of doubt and bursts of divine inspiration. They were not saints yet. They were men wrestling with their fears, their pasts, and the brutal reality of imprisonment. But the bond they formed in that cell was unbreakable, a brotherhood forged in faith and fortified by the shared vision of a kingdom beyond the reach of Rome's might. This was more than survival. It was a spiritual awakening. The clanging of chains was drowned out by the louder call of destiny. Proceso and Martiniano began to see their suffering not as a punishment, but as a test, a divine forge to temper their souls into unyielding champions of faith. As days turned to weeks, their story spread beyond the prison walls, carried by whispers and prayers from those who believed in their cause. They became symbols of hope to the oppressed, living proof that even in the darkest hours, courage and conviction could shine brighter than any sword. This chapter of their lives was only the beginning. The trials that awaited would demand the ultimate sacrifice, but Proceso and Martiniano stood ready, no longer captives of Rome, but champions of a faith that promised victory beyond death. Their legacy was being written, letter by letter, in the hearts of those who dared to believe. Chapter 2. The Prison of Shadows and the Flame of Spirit. Behind the cold, iron bars of the Roman dungeon, time took on a new meaning. Days blurred into nights, and nights into endless silence, broken only by the distant echoes of footsteps and the whispered prayers of the faithful. For Proceso and Martiniano, this was no ordinary imprisonment. It was a trial of spirit, a battlefield where unseen forces clashed and the true measure of a soul was revealed. The walls were thick with despair, yet inside those confines, an extraordinary light began to shine, a light born not of the sun, but of unwavering faith. In the darkness, Proceso discovered a strength he never knew he possessed. The fear that had once shackled his heart began to fade, replaced by a quiet courage that grew with each passing day. Martiniano, too, found himself transformed. The disciplined soldier who had once relied on the might of his sword now learned to wield a different weapon: prayer. In the solitude of his cell, he wrestled with his past loyalties and the call of a higher power. The iron bars could hold his body, but his spirit soared free, unbroken and resolute. Their days in prison were marked by hardship. Hunger gnawed at their bodies, cold seeped into their bones, and the cruelty of guards tested their resolve. Yet, it was within these very trials that their faith was tempered like steel and fire. They bore their suffering with a dignity that baffled their captors, a silent testament to the power that sustained them. Stories of miraculous events began to weave through the prison corridors. Whispers spoke of a mysterious light that appeared during the darkest nights, comforting the prisoners and filling their hearts with hope. Some guards, hardened by years of duty, found themselves moved by the courage of these two men, courage that seemed to transcend the bounds of human endurance. Proceso and Martiniano shared their faith with fellow captives, offering words of hope and strength. Their prayers became a lifeline, binding the imprisoned into a community of believers whose spirits refused to be crushed. The prison, intended as a place of despair, became a sanctuary of faith and fellowship. Despite the looming shadow of death, they never wavered. Their eyes remained fixed on a promise beyond this world, a promise of resurrection and eternal life. They knew that their suffering was not in vain, but a path leading to a greater glory. This chapter of their journey was a testament to the unbreakable spirit of faith, a faith that no dungeon could contain, no chain could bind, and no threat could extinguish. Proceso and Martiniano had become beacons of light in the prison of shadows, shining with a brilliance that would inspire generations to come. Chapter 3: Martyrs' Glory, the Triumph Beyond Death. The day of reckoning came with the rising sun casting long shadows across the ancient stones of Rome. Proceso and Martiniano stood together once more, not as prisoners, but as warriors ready to face their final battle. Their courage had been forged in the fires of suffering and sealed by an unshakable faith that no earthly power could break. Before the imperial magistrates, they proclaimed their belief in a kingdom that no sword or decree could destroy. The soldiers who brought them to trial saw not fear, but a radiant calm in their eyes, a calm born from the certainty of a victory far beyond the temporal. The sentence was death, swift and merciless. Yet, in the face of looming mortality, Proceso and Martiniano remained steadfast. They knew that martyrdom was not an end, but a passage, a gateway to eternal life and glory. Their spirits soared beyond the cruelty of flesh, carried on the wings of faith. As they faced the executioner's blade, something extraordinary happened. Witnesses spoke of a sudden light surrounding the martyrs, a brilliance that blinded their captors and filled the air with a sacred silence. Their final breaths were prayers, calls to God that echoed through the ages. The blood of Proceso and Martiniano became the seed of a new hope, watered by countless prayers and miracles. Stories spread through Rome and beyond, telling of healings and protections granted to those who invoked their names. The faithful came to honor them, not only as martyrs, but as powerful intercessors before the throne of heaven. Their tombs became places of pilgrimage, where the weary found strength and the lost found guidance. The Church recognized their sacrifice, canonizing them as saints, shining examples of courage, faith, and divine love. Today, the legacy of Saints Proceso and Martiniano lives on. Their story invites us to stand fearless in our own trials, to hold fast to hope when darkness surrounds us, and to believe in a power greater than any earthly kingdom. They remind us that true victory lies not in avoiding death, but in facing it with the heart of a saint, unyielding, radiant, and eternal. The eternal flame of faith. As the echoes of Proceso and Martiniano's story fade into history, their legacy continues to burn like an eternal flame, a light that refuses to be extinguished by time or trial. Their lives teach us that true courage is born not from the absence of fear, but from the strength to stand firm despite it. In a world often shadowed by uncertainty and hardship, their example shines as a beacon of hope. They remind us that faith can transform even the darkest prisons into sanctuaries of peace, that chains can bind the body, but never the spirit, and that the greatest victory is found not in power or conquest, but in steadfast love and sacrifice. Saints Proceso and Martiniano call each of us to a higher courage, to live with conviction, to embrace our struggles with grace, and to walk boldly toward the unknown, trusting in a light that guides beyond the horizon. May their story inspire you to carry your own flame of faith, to shine brightly in your journey, and to remember that, like them, you too are a warrior in the timeless battle for truth and love.